it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. It gives me great pleasure this evening to introduce a truly phenomenal story by the one and only Bikram Mann, also known as Mandahrk. And more importantly, his first book, Unclean Spirits, is now available, so full details of how to order it are in the video description. So listen to the phenomenal story, and then I know you're going to be wanting more, so please visit the link and support this wonderful, wonderful storyteller. Well, without further delay, here we go with the kids at my school are disappearing one by one, and I'm the only one who remembers them. You have to believe me, I cried, desperately searching her eyes for anything but the doubt and pity that I saw in them. She's real. Please, you all know her. For a moment there, she faltered. I thought maybe my sincerity had finally made her consider the possibility that I might have been telling the truth. But that moment was gone in a flash, and her eyes once again hardened into those black pebbles I had become so familiar with, as she steeled herself to do what she thought needed to be done. We can't keep doing this, Nain, she said softly, misplaced compassion dripping from her tongue. Have you been taking your medicines? I looked away guiltily. You're not well, child, she said, gently shaking her head. It's not your fault, and these things just happen, but you must focus on getting better, right? But they make me feel strange, I protested. Whenever I eat them, I just want to sleep all the time. Well, that's how we know they're working, she said, her head bobbing enthusiastically underneath her white wimple. Don't worry, you'll be back to your old self in no time. I opened my mouth to protest when Sister Mercy gave me that firm smile of hers that signaled the end of the conversation. Now, be a good girl. Go take your medicine, she said. I nodded, trying hard to fight back my tears. There was no point in arguing anymore. We'd had this exact same conversation 3 times before, with the exact same result each time. I followed her meekly as she led me out of her office. As I began plodding back to class, I rubbed my eyes as I thought about what my life had become. Kastub was the first one to disappear. He wasn't very nice to me, a bit of a bully, if I say so myself. He was always pulling my hair and calling me names. I understand why he picked on me, though. I was a soft target. Unlike most of the other kids here, I was an orphan, left in a little basket outside Sister Mercy's house when I was just a baby. As I grew up, making friends didn't come easy to me. I was too shy, too awkward. I prefer the company of books instead of other kids my age, so I ended up a fly on the wall, someone who sees but is never seen. Maybe that's why I was the only one who noticed when Kastub went missing. I remember the bewildered looks others gave me when I asked where he was. At first I thought they were merely surprised that I was asking about someone who'd bullied me so badly. That, plus the fact that I actually spoke to them. To my utter shock, they turned around and asked me who Kastub was. Maybe they're just playing a prank on me, I reasoned. It wouldn't be the first time they did something mean to me like that. But as the day wore on, more and more people denied ever knowing someone of that name. Even those who buzzed around him like mean little bees looked at me like I'd grown another head and began calling me Nutty Naina. It was the 3rd period and I was bawling like a baby when Sanika Mom pulled me aside to find out what was wrong with me. Through tears and coughs, I somehow managed to tell her why I was so distressed, only to be sent to Sister Mercy's office when I insisted that Kastub was real. My face lit up at that. If no one else would, then surely the woman who'd raised me would believe me, but no. She instead told me that as a 10-year-old girl, I was getting far too old to still be having imaginary friends, let alone to be raising such a ruckus over one. I begged and pleaded and stomped my feet before she finally relented and pulled out the school records. She went through the details of every kid registered in my class, with me keeping a close watch from her shoulders. Well, there was no Kastub anywhere. Well, my class had 37 kids all along, not 38. Even my roll number had changed. At this point, I broke down and began to scream. Definitely not my proudest moment, I know, but please don't judge me. I thought I was genuinely losing my mind. Our gym teacher, Prakash sir, popped his head in, wondering what exactly was going on in the principal's office, and that embarrassed Sister Mercy no end. But I was too far gone to be listening to reason. It was only when she raised her voice for quite possibly the first time in my life that I finally shut up, wiped my face, and sulked back to class. Unbeknownst to me at the time, my life had changed for good that day. Well, to the other kids, I was no longer just a weird kid. I was the weird kid. Everyone avoided me, including most of the girls in my own room. No one wanted to talk to the creepy girl who cried over imaginary friends. But that was all right. I liked being alone. This was when Sister Mercy decided to bring in Rachna Mum. Sister Mercy said she was hired for the sake of the entire school, but I think my outburst was the main reason for it, since I spent the most time with her, just talking about my life. She tried very hard to help me deal with my experiences, to help me understand that I had created Kaustubh because I was too lonely. It didn't make much sense to me. Why would I create an imaginary friend who bullied me? It wasn't all bad, however. Rachna Mum gave me chocolate every time I went to her. Roshni was the next one to disappear. It had happened only a couple of months after Kaustubh. It was the day after we'd had our weekly cleanliness checks, just like the last time, that she disappeared. I was putting Kaustubh's disappearance behind me, and with Rachna Mum's help, I had even begun to convince myself that I'd indeed imagined his entire existence when Roshni up and vanished. Now, we weren't in the same class, but I knew of her as we lived on the same floor in the hostel, and almost immediately noticed that she wasn't there. Unlike Kaustubh, Roshni was nice to me, even scolding those who'd bullied me, so I hoped that this time I wouldn't be the only one to notice it. But I was wrong. Even her roommates were acting like she'd never existed. And so, feeling helpless, I did something drastic. I called the police. Well, Sister Mercy was furious at me. She wasted almost an entire day assuring the police that no child was missing and that I just had an overactive imagination. After going through the records and talking to the other kids, the police officers came and gave me a stern talking to for wasting their time before leaving after I mumbled an insincere apology. Later that day, after I'd received my scolding, I sat down again with Rachna Mum, who prescribed me some medicines. I meekly listened to whatever she had to say, knowing in my heart that I wasn't crazy. There was just something very wrong with St. Agnes boarding school. "This is only temporary," Rachna Mum said as she tore the prescription paper. "We'll stop when you get better, okay?" I nodded. I hated those medicines. They made me feel so drowsy. I wanted to sleep even when I was reading. I don't think they made me any better because Kaustubh and Roshni were still as real in my mind as ever. Well, what made it worse were my memories. Things that I'd seen, things that I'd done were no longer real because the people involved in those memories no longer existed. I had to be very careful when talking to people. If I accidentally said something that for them never happened, they'd call me names and make fun of me. I became even more introverted than before. I wished that those two would come back, even Kaustubh. We could go back to the way things used to be. By the time it next happened, I had learnt my lesson and wisely kept my mouth shut when Jose went missing on a Friday, again a couple of months later. Everyone began pretending that he'd never existed, so I joined them in their little game, all the time wondering who was going to be next and when this would all end. Each Thursday night after our weekly checks, I'd stay up late, terrified that I could be the one to disappear and no one would even notice. What scared me most was the fact that it wouldn't even have to be magic to have the same result in my case. I could just walk away and no one would think of me. No one cared about me, well, apart from Sister Mercy and Rukmini. Rukmini was my only friend. Like me, she was also bullied by the others. They called her Piggy because she was fat, but that didn't bother me. I liked that she was nice and loved Enid Blyton, but most of all, she believed in me. Or maybe she was just pretending to because she liked having someone to talk to. Regardless, it was a relief talking about everything with someone who didn't think you were completely crazy. We'd sit on the top bunk in our bunk beds across from each other and talk about all the possible reasons kids could be vanishing, or why I was the only one who remembered them. And she'd tell me about the strange half-faced woman who stood at the foot of my bed each night. Well, I think she just made that up to humor me because I'd never seen that woman, and I was quite experienced with strange stuff. My resolve broke when Rukmini went missing. I knew what had happened the moment I saw her empty, made-up bed in the morning. It was like she'd never existed. I desperately searched for any trace of her, but there was nothing. Her bed was made, her almirah was empty, all her books and clothes were gone. It was too much for me. My second greatest fear had come true, and my only friend was now gone. I forgot all about keeping my mouth shut and started crying when everyone said there was no one named Rukmini in my class. On top of that, I was punished and sent to Sister Mercy's office for using the word piggy for another person, even though they insisted that Rukmini wasn't real. That made me so angry because the teachers had done nothing when Rukmini complained about other kids teasing her by using that word. But if I used it to search for my missing friend and not to hurt her, I was punished. How unfair. But this time was different. Sister Mercy might not believe me now, but I doubt that would last. You see, we had anticipated that this could happen, so I'd taken down Rukmini's mom's phone number in case something like this did happen. I wiped my tears as I walked to my room and steeled myself for what I had to do next. I pretended to swallow the medicine and quickly spat it out the second Sister Mercy left, and then took out my phone and dialed the number. Well, I didn't have to wait long. "Hello? Who is this?" asked the sweet-sounding woman. "Hi, Mom. My name is Naina. I'm a friend of Rukmini," I said eagerly. "Yes?" she asked. I could sense amusement in her voice. Oh, my heart jumped in happiness. I couldn't control my excitement. "Really?" I exclaimed. "You remember her?" She laughed. "Well, it hasn't been that long since I've seen her." "So how exactly do you know her, young lady?" she questioned merrily. "Oh, we're in the same class," I replied. "Oh, well, that's strange," she giggled, "considering she graduated 30 years ago." "What?" "What?" I asked. "She's only 12. "Oh, darling, I think you have the wrong number," she said softly. "No, I don't. She gave it to me. Your daughter gave it to me, and it told me to call you if something happened to her," I said rapidly. "And now she's gone missing, and no one—" "Hold on, Naina," she cut me off. "Now I know you've got the wrong number because I don't have any children. Listen, this sounds serious. Maybe you should—" But I wasn't listening anymore. I first thought that maybe I'd put in the wrong number on my phone, so I tried calling again, carefully putting in the numbers this time. But the same woman picked up again, so I quickly cut the call. Maybe I copied the number wrong. I tried changing some digits and tried again. Nothing worked. Either the number didn't exist, or I got more wrong numbers. I gave up after about the 20th time I'd called a wrong number and curled up in my bed. I was alone. The only girl who'd believed me was now gone, erased from this world. My suspicions had turned out to be correct. When kids disappeared from our school, the entire world just forgot about them, and not just those here. I wasn't feeling hungry that night, but my stomach gurgled anyway, so with a heavy heart I dragged myself out of bed and trudged downstairs to the canteen. Taking my food, I silently walked over to our favorite eating spot in the corner. My eating spot. I'm pretty sure no one remembers me sitting on that bench and eating with anyone but myself. I could feel tears welling up within me again as I realized just how lonely I was. But I pushed them down and started eating. I saw some girls pointing at me and giggling. Why didn't they disappear instead of Rukmini? I quickly finished my meal and went upstairs to my room. The other 2 girls who slept on the bottom of the bunk beds weren't here yet, but I was sure they'd be back by lights out time. After brushing my teeth, I retreated to the safety of my blanket and called it a day. I was dreaming of lying in bed and talking to Rukmini. I realized I was awake when I tried to reply to her question about which of the famous 5 or secret 7 books I liked better, and saw, with a heavy heart, that she wasn't there. Blinking back tears, I was about to turn around and face the wall when I saw a strange shadow on the wall above her bed. I froze. What could that be? I saw that my other roommates, Carol, who slept below me, and Verinda, who slept below Rukmini, were in their beds, so it couldn't have been them. Besides, they were much too short to be casting shadows about like that. I slowly turned my head and looked at the foot of my bed, and I nearly screamed. Standing on the edge of Carol's bed, such that only her head was visible to me, was the strange half-faced woman that Rukmini had told me about. The left side of her face was just not there, as if God had decided to erase it, just like he'd erased Rukmini and the others from this world. Blood-red tears ran down the right side of this ghostly woman's face as she stared at me with an unblinking eye that shone in the dark. I quickly brought my legs up to my chest in an attempt to put as much distance between us as I could. Was this the monster that was taking kids from this school? Was she going to take me now as well? But that couldn't be right. Never before had 2 kids disappeared on the same Thursday night. And I remembered that Rukmini had been seeing this woman for a long time. Or did that mean that while I was next, I still had some time? I put my head out of the blanket. She was still there. I pulled my blanket back over my head and reached for my pillow, where my hands brushed against something. It was a photo. I shivered as I knew I hadn't been the one to put that there. I used my phone's flashlight to light up the picture. It was me. I was in the photo, sitting under the tree in the playground with a book in my lap, talking to Rukmini, who was right next to me. Well, I knew it was Rukmini from the dress and her body shape. Not her face, because the part of the picture where her face should have been had been burnt off, and above it were the words, "Good girls should know when to keep their mouths shut. S." What does that mean? Who left that here? Why is this happening to me? I didn't know what was going on. I was so scared. And I could still feel that woman at the edge of my bed. Part 2. Have you been sleeping well? Rukmini asked, her brows furrowing with worry. I nodded and quickly stifled a yawn. She smiled. It's important that you get a good night's sleep, Naina, she said. A growing kid like you needs it the most. I nodded again. Is anything bothering you? She looked concerned. Oh, yes, ma'am, a half-faced woman comes and puts her messed-up head on the foot of my bed every night. Of course, you'd totally believe me if I said that, and not just give me even more powerful medicines. So I shook my head. Good girls who know when to keep their mouths shut. This is a safe space, she added. You can say whatever you want here, no judgments. I'm fine, I lied. I'm just a little tired. So, how are things in school? She asked, changing the topic. Are the kids treating you well? Well, it's the same, I replied. Some of them oink at me, asking me where Piggy is. Make fun of Rook, I mean my imaginary friend, but I don't respond. And why is that? She asked, waiting for me to give my rehearsed answer. Because giving them any reaction only empowers them and shows them that they're getting to me, I answered dutifully. And how does it make you feel when you think of Rukmini now? She inquired after a couple of seconds. I shrugged. Naina? She insisted. No, she's not real. I lied again. I just wish I could be normal like the others. But you are normal, Nain, she corrected me. Having an illness doesn't make you not normal. It just means you're not well. And just like any other illness, this too can be treated, okay? But not all diseases are curable, are they? I looked at the clock behind her. Can I go now, Mom? I asked impatiently. Yes, she sighed. We'll continue this the day after tomorrow, okay? I nodded and began to leave. Don't forget to sleep, Nain, she called out as I left the room. Rest is important. My time with Rachna, Mom, always feels both painfully long and astonishingly short at the same time. Well, I really don't know how else to say it. Every moment sitting there and talking to her feels stretched out, like a chewing gum, but at the same time, when it's over, I'm left wondering how did all the time go by so fast. It's a very disconcerting feeling. Well, she was right that I wasn't getting any sleep. I've just been too terrified of being erased by the strange woman to be getting any sleep at all. If it hadn't been for short naps in classes, my eyes would have melted in their sockets by now. I dreaded going to my room now, even during the day. There was this heavy feeling I got when I was there, as if my heart was going to sink into my chest. It was like the air was thicker somehow, if that makes any sense. I was sure Rachna Mom would say that it was all in my head, and maybe it was just my fear, because I certainly didn't feel this way when I didn't know the half-faced woman was real. I really didn't like my room anymore. I started spending most of my free time in the library, doing my homework and getting some light reading done. After school was over that day, and I'd had my lunch, I went to the library and did my math homework. Have I told you how much I like math? It's great. I'm sure it was mostly because of Sanika Mom. She was such a good teacher. She was the only one who used props and field trips to teach us. Her classes were fun and were the only place where my mind was distracted from the thoughts of Rukmini and the demon woman. I was dozing on a Nancy Drew novel when the librarian gently shook me awake. I smiled sheepishly as I realized that it was closing time. The sun had gone back to its hiding place, vacating its space for the moon. I must have slept for a good 3 hours or so because my neck hurt, but the rest of my body felt refreshed. I put my books in my bag and left the library, making my way over to the canteen. The only time I'd spend in my room was the curfew time, when we were supposed to sleep, not a second more though. And so after dinner, I decided to go to Sister Mercy's house to see what she was doing, but she wasn't there. The way our school was built was that we had the school building between the boys' and girls' hostels, with administrative buildings and the houses of the teachers circling them. It was a pretty safe area, well, apart from the odd ghostly woman in your bedroom. Or maybe she was in the administrative building. The security guards shouted at me when they saw me, and I scampered off back to the hostel, dreading what was to come later at night. Carol and Verinda were busy giggling away at something when I entered our room. They stopped when they saw me, whispered something to each other, and began giggling harder than before. God, I hated it when they did that. So annoying. But their presence was still oddly comforting, even though I knew that the woman would still come at night regardless of whether they were there or not. Thought about waking them up at night when she comes. But what if they couldn't see her? What if she disappeared? I'd end up getting made fun of again, and there was always the possibility that she could attack them if they saw her. I didn't hate them enough to knowingly put them in harm's way. Good girls should know when to keep their mouths shut. God, I wonder who wrote that, and why. Was it a warning? Was the woman warning me not to tell anyone about her? Or was this S someone else entirely? I bet Nancy Drew could figure that out. But I was no Nancy Drew. I was just a friendless, mentally ill loser, curled up in her old blanket. I really shouldn't have slept in the library that evening, because I was wide awake now. The ticking of the clock sounded like swords striking each other, and the strange buzzing in my ear was nearly deafening. Have you ever noticed that sound? You can hear it when there are little to no other sounds, like thousands of bees buzzing around near your eardrums. I once focused on that sound so hard, I gave myself a headache. I felt something tugging at my bedsheet, and I froze. There she was. I felt that certain weight on the bottom of my bed. She must be dragging herself up. I was utterly terrified, but to sate some weird curiosity, I opened my eyes and looked at my feet. She placed her head on top of her hands like a screwed-up puppy and began lifelessly staring at me. I whimpered as I saw her eyes. As it moved when she caught me looking at her. Drawing my blanket over my head, I brought my feet up and forcefully shut my eyes. Is it really going to be like this? I wondered. Is she just going to stay there and stare for the whole night? My fear began to fade as time passed, and I started to feel angry. Why doesn't she just go away? What does she want from me? I used that anger to push down my fear. Then, to my own astonishment, I spoke to her. "What do you want?" I whispered angrily. Her eyes widened and her mouth fell open, as if she was shocked someone had spoken to her. If that wasn't terrifying enough, her head then violently snapped back with a sickening crunch, such that her neck was the only thing visible to me. Her hands went backwards and above her head, and she disappeared from sight. I quickly got up to see what she was doing and saw that she was crawling backwards on her hands and feet. Her head went even further back, doing almost a 360 as it popped out from beneath her legs as she continued to crawl backwards. Her body passed through the closed door, and when it was halfway in, she stopped and her eye locked onto me, sending shivers down my spine. Was she calling me? Does she want me to accompany her? Well, it might have been a terrible idea, but I decided to follow her. I got down from my bed as quietly as I could, taking extra precaution to make sure I didn't wake Carol or Verinda. After quickly putting on my slippers, I pushed the door open. The door moaned and creaked as I opened it, and I almost squealed in panic. But I was safe. My roommates were still sleeping. I saw the woman's weirdly contorted body at the end of the dimly lit hallway, near the stairs. Where was she taking me? And who in their right mind decides to follow a demon in the dead of night? Well, everyone in my life thinks that I'm not of the right mind, so there really wasn't anyone more qualified to be making a bad decision like this. As I approached the stairs, I saw her slither down the railing. She moved in such a bizarre manner, as if she didn't have complete control of her near-unbreakable body. I tiptoed my way downstairs, using my phone's flashlight to light up my path. Lata, our security guard, was asleep on the bench near her desk. I slipped past her and made my way outside of the hostel. A thin fog hung on the chilly winter air, making me glad I was wearing a thick jacket. I could hear dogs barking and howling in the distance. I looked around for the half-faced woman, getting anxious that I'd lost her, before I spotted her in front of one of the teachers' houses. As she saw me, she turned and walked inside the house, through the open door. For a second, I hesitated. Should I really be breaking into a teacher's house? Well, I decided that this was far too important and that I'd face the consequences later. Maybe I would get some answers tonight. The nameplate stated that the house belonged to Prakash Sharma, our gym teacher. Was he involved in what was happening to me? Well, granted, the disappearances always happened after the weekly checks carried about him and Sister Rose, but I'd never considered that he himself could have been involved, especially after I started seeing the demonic lady in my room. Well, best not to make too many assumptions. I shivered as I walked into his house. If I got caught, I'd be in more trouble than I'd ever been in my life. The house was completely dark and silent. I quickly surmised that he wasn't here. Why was his house not locked then? Did the woman open it, or did he really forget to lock it? I don't know. The jingling of keys brought me out of my chain of thoughts, and I walked towards the source of that sound, straight into Prakash Sir's bedroom. I swung my phone around and took in the scene in front of me. The woman was nowhere to be seen, and somehow I knew I wouldn't be seeing her again that evening. A painting on one of the walls had been brought down, revealing a safe embedded into the wall, with a key dangling from it. Well, it was a little too high for me to reach, so I used one of the chairs in the room to elevate myself, and I opened the safe. On top of a stack of papers were a bunch of strange items. A wristwatch, a stuffed animal, a headband. Wait a second. I know that headband. It belongs to Rukmini. What was that doing here? I shuddered as I considered the implications. Did Prakash sir kill my friend? How about those other items? Did they belong to the other kids? What was he doing with them? I pulled out the stack of papers and began reading them. The title of the first page I pulled out was Psychiatric Evaluation. What in the world? I read my name. It was about me. Present illness. Patient has been diagnosed with early onset schizophrenia. She's exhibited signs of hallucinations, delusions, and excessive fears. She remembers everything clearly, not just brief flashes. Clearly the memory alterations did not work on her. You should be pleased. She's far more powerful than you realized. Well, some of the notes were handwritten. Why did Prakash sir have Rakshna Mam's notes? Were they working together? What was happening here? I continued reading. Patient's activity level, attention and concentration were observed to be within normal levels. Hypnosis doesn't work on her. I can put her in a drowsy state at the most. This is a good sign. Medication prescribed. Olanzapine. Oh, not this. I actually just gave her a strong sedative. I could feel tears forming in my eyes. I was so confused and scared. What were Rakna Mam and Prakash sir doing to me? Well, I only knew one thing. I have to get these papers to Sister Mercy as soon as possible. I took those papers and shoved them in my jacket when I heard footsteps coming from outside. Oh no, he's back. My blood ran cold. I didn't want to find out how he'd react if he found me like this. Who's there? He shouted. Oh, what do I do? What do I do? I couldn't really escape through the front door now. He'd spot me in a second. The windows were my only option, but would I have enough time to open them? I made a split-second decision and quickly shut the bedroom door. I figured that by the time he found a way to open it, I would have escaped through the windows. And he slammed into the door as soon as I'd shut it. Open it, he screamed. Open the fucking door. He started banging on the door as I made my way to the window. Open it right fucking now, he growled. Oh, I'll fucking kill you. Open it. I ran to the windows and began to open them when Prakash sir let out a blood-curdling scream. Complete silence descended on the room, and I hesitated. What was he doing now? I got my answer in the form of animalistic growling. He slammed into the door again, this time so hard that it shook on its hinges. And again, and again. But the door held firm. I put my leg over the window and was about to climb out when the door shattered, sending splinters flying everywhere. A thick, clawed hand reached out and opened the door, as I fell outside and then began scrambling along the grass. I gingerly got up and soon heard his feet pounding on the floor as he slowly walked around the bedroom. God, he's not human. He's not human. No way a human can be like that. I quickly got to my feet and began running towards my hostel. I could hear him behind me, snarling and growling and snapping his teeth with every breath as he gained on me with unnatural speed. I hadn't even made it to the main road when he crashed into me, making me slam into the ground. I scraped my hands and feet really badly, but that wasn't even a concern at that moment. I turned around and looked at the monster hunting me. His large frame loomed over me, and he was being illuminated by the bright moon. Sharp fangs protruded from his lower lip, and a long, sinewy, blood-red tongue hung loosely between them. His face was much larger than it usually was, but apart from the fangs, he looked surprisingly human. and he was built like a truck, muscles so large they had ripped his shirt open, exposing his disgusting hairy chest. This can't be real, I thought. But the harsh crunching of the gravel underneath the monster's feet reminded me that it was. I whimpered as he picked me up, threw me over his shoulders, and carried me back to his house. I wanted to scream and call for help, but was so beyond frightened that I couldn't even open my mouth. I settled for softly sobbing on this thing's shoulder. Covered the distance back to his house in a matter of seconds. I hadn't even begun to process the night's events when he had me securely tied to a chair in his dining room. I watched in stunned silence as he transformed back to his usual self with some painful pops and crackles. "How did you get in here?" he asked after drinking a glass of water. I didn't reply. Good girls should know when to keep their mouths shut. "The door was locked," he continued, "and so was the safe. How did you open it?" "What do you want from me?" I sobbed. "All in good time," he answered, and made his way over to the fridge. "You really are quite resourceful, aren't you?" He took out what looked like a bag of sliced meat and went into the kitchen, soon coming back with some bread. "What did you do to Rukmini and the others?" I asked, after I'd stopped crying. "What do you think?" he smirked. He took the meat out of the bag and began making sandwiches. "And if you don't do as I say, your beloved Sister Mercy is going to be next," he added. I shuddered. God, please end this nightmare. I just want to go back to my room. He walked over to me with a sandwich on a plate. "Eat," he said. "Growing girls need to keep their strength up." I shook my head. "I'm not hungry," I whispered. "Eat." He slammed his hand onto the table. I took a bite, immediately scrunching my face at the disgusting taste. "What is this?" I asked, almost on the verge of throwing up. "Why, dear Naina," he said, "I'm disappointed. Here I was thinking you'd recognize the taste of Biggie." Part 3. My gym teacher had just fed me the flesh of my dead best friend. I know most people would have had a violent reaction to that, screaming, vomiting, crying, but I just sat there listlessly. He was shouting in my ears, warning me not to tell anyone about this and threatening to kill me, and I wasn't paying any attention. I was in shock when I wondered, probably for the 100th time in the past few days, what I had done to deserve this. I was still in a daze when he cut the ropes holding me down. When he asked me to leave, when I walked all the way back to my hostel, the pain in my feet were not even registering in my brain. The next thing I remember is sitting in the bathroom, crying my eyes out. Every person has a limit to how much they can handle. Your sanity, much like a rubber band, can only stretch for so much before suddenly snapping, leaving you a blubbering mess. Well, I was at that limit. One more push and my rubber band would snap. Well, most people would suggest therapy at this point, and I laughed bitterly when I remembered how that wasn't even an option for me. After what seemed like hours, I dried my eyes and lumbered back to my bed. I was exhausted, and I knew that the half-faced woman wasn't trying to harm me. Not to mention that she wasn't even there yet. Well, I still couldn't get a wink of sleep that night, though. Hours passed, and I just lay there, with nothing concrete on my mind, feeling more and more hopeless by the second. When the first rays of light pierced the windows, I decided to get out of my bed and watch the sunrise. They say it's darkest just before dawn, and that the first light of dawn always brings with it good tidings, or at least hope, and I could really empathize with that sentiment because I felt much better when I saw the pale orange sky in the morning. I was going to survive this. No matter what happened, no matter how hard it got, I was going to live. With that resolve in my heart, I went back inside and got ready for school. I needed to think about what I could do to maximize my chances of survival, and, as they say, knowledge is power. And so before going down for breakfast, I made a list of all the things I knew about. 1. My gym teacher and psychiatrist were involved in a conspiracy to kill and eat children. 2. They could somehow erase the kids they killed from people's memories. 3. They wanted to kill me, but were not doing so for some unfathomable reason. 4. My psychiatrist, Bikram Mann, was trying to hypnotize me at each session I had with her. 5. There was a ghostly woman who stayed at my bed each night and was trying to help me. 6. I had an ally named S, who may or may not have been the half-faced woman. And there were so many questions I had as well. 1. Why hadn't they killed me yet? 2. How could I stop them? 3. Was anyone else involved with them? 4. What and who was this half-faced woman, and why was she helping me? And 5. Who was S? Think. Plan. Survive. I'd read that in a book, and it was going to be my mantra in life now. First of all, I knew that I had to get in contact with S. Maybe they knew more about what was happening in this school, but how? Initially I thought that it might be Sister Mercy herself, but that didn't make much sense. Why would she choose to send me cryptic messages when she and I spent such a lot of time alone? I had another guess, but I'd have to wait for now. I put the list in my bag and found a pouch in there with a piece of paper attached to it. With a little smell, the demons dispel. S. I smiled as I opened the pouch and saw that it contained this greyish, powder-like substance. I had absolutely no idea when that had got in there, but I said a prayer of thanks to S. I felt a lot better knowing that I had something to defend myself with now. The first class I had that morning was PE, Phys Ed. I caught Prakash sir smirking at me multiple times while watching my classmates play badminton. I chose not to react in any way, just clutched my bag harder, thinking about the pouch inside it. He marched over to me after the bell rang, signaling the end of class. "Bikram Mann wants to see you," he said, grinning like the cat who'd eaten the canary. "Tomorrow's session has been preponed. Go now." I just nodded and walked away. But why would she interrupt my classes? Maybe she'd found out about last night and wanted to see how I'd react. I twiddled my thumbs nervously as I thought about how to escape from being hypnotized. Well, if she knew what had happened last night, it certainly didn't show on her face when I walked in and sat down, clutching my bag to my chest. "Oh, good morning, Naina," she said with a smile on her face. "Oh, don't let her see anything on your face," I thought, as I fought hard to keep my expressions neutral. "Good morning, Mom," I replied. "Well, I had to prepone our session because I was worried about you," she said. "Why, Mom?" I asked. "I'm doing fine." "Well, I heard that you were crying in the bathroom last night, at around 2 a.m., she prodded. "Who told you that?" I asked, before I could control myself. "Just someone who's very worried about you, much like me," she replied. "Yeah, right. Most likely she had someone in my hostel spying on me. But who could it be? One of the other kids? How much did that person know about what was happening here? Were they monsters like her, or were they just being used by her? I doubt that she would entrust food with an important job like this, when clearly I meant something to them. Or maybe it was our security guard Lata, who I'd caught napping when the half-faced woman took me to Prakash sir's house. Did she wake up when I came back? I wasn't paying attention then, so I wasn't sure if she was awake or not. "Your health is my concern, Naina," she added. "If you're not feeling well and if the medicines aren't working on you, we can always change our strategy." "I'm fine, Mom," I said. "I don't know who told you I was crying last night, but I wasn't. I'm okay." "You don't have to lie to me, Naina," she said. "Remember, this is a safe space." My leg began vibrating at that. I took my phone out and snoozed the alarm. "Excuse me," I said. The alarm would go off again in 5 minutes or so, helping me keep track of time and staving off any attempts at hypnosis. "You really should keep your phone switched off when you're here, Nain," she said, and then immediately moved on before I could reply. "So, what happened last night that made you feel so bad, Nain?" I bit my lip nervously. I didn't know how my next gamble would pay off. Will it work or will it make things worse for me? How badly did they want me near them? Could they send me to a mental hospital if I acted out? I met Prakash, sir, last night," I said. "He showed me the psychiatric notes you have on me that you gave to him." Her reaction was exactly what I wanted. Her eyes widened and her jaw dropped as she began gaping like a fish. Well, she didn't say anything for the next couple of seconds, trying to process what I just said. Well, that reaction told me a lot of things. A, Prakash, sir, hadn't told her what had happened last night. B, she didn't know what exactly had happened last night, despite her spies, apart from the fact that I was crying in the bathroom, but she still chose to use Prakash, sir, to deliver a message to me to come to her room for a session. Why? Was it a power play? Did they not trust each other? How were they then working together? The only way I could see that happening is that if they'd someone else working with them, probably above them. But who and how do I find them? "Why did he do that?" she whispered. Yes, I'd hit the jackpot. I wanted to pump my fists in the air, but controlled myself. She pretty much admitted that there was at least a copy of her professional notes on me that wasn't in her possession. I'd successfully come out of this without being labelled a lunatic for talking about monsters who ate kids, and still forced her to make a mistake. Score 1 for Nutty Nain. I shrugged in response. "What sort of notes were they?" she asked, as she steadied herself. "Look, it's a matter of doctor-patient privilege." "Well, a privilege you've broken yourself, Mom." "I don't understand," I replied, innocently. "You think I'm going to tell you about your handwritten notes? Think again, Mom." She became even more confused at that. I could see the wheels turning behind her eyes as she blinked in confusion. They distrusted each other. No, more importantly, they distrusted each other enough to suspect each other of working against them. This was something I could use in the future. Think, plan, survive. My leg then vibrated, and I snoozed the alarm again. "Mom, can I please go?" I asked. "I'll miss my math class." She nodded absent-mindedly, and I scampered off before she could change her mind. I had a little smile on my face when I finally shut off the alarm on my phone. The bell rang just as I made my way to the class, and kids were leaving the classroom giggling as they saw me. It didn't even bother me anymore. I had much bigger things to worry about now. Sonika Mom was gathering her books when I approached her, and I cleared my throat. "Yes, Naina?" she smiled. "How can I help you?" "Oh, good morning, Mom," I greeted her. "Rachna Mom had called me to her office, so I missed your class. Sorry." "That's okay," she replied. "You can get the notes from someone else, all right? I can ask Vandana to help you if you want." "Thank you," I said gratefully. "So, how are you feeling, Naina?" she asked. "Is everything okay?" I nodded. "I'm feeling much better," I said honestly. "You want a chocolate?" she asked, pulling out a big Cadbury from her purse. "Thank you," I said, "but Sister Mercy said I shouldn't eat too much chocolate." "I'm not going to tell her," she whispered conspiratorially. "You won't either, will you?" I shook my head and quickly snatched the chocolate bar. "Right. Good girls should know when to keep their mouth shut," she said with a wink. I smiled harder then than I had in a long time and left the classroom. It was a good day. I sailed through the other classes before the recess, paying the utmost attention in class, even as my mind would try to wander off to thoughts of Rukmini and what had happened last night. By the time the bell for recess rang, my stomach was a pit of boiling but controlled rage, with all the fear having left my body. I knew what I was going to do next, and it would cause the type of chaos that people would remember for a long time to come. Let's see how this works out. I could hear the kerfuffle coming from the staff room at the staircase on the other end of the hallway. It's funny how the same teachers who insist on silence and discipline in class can be so rowdy. Well, not all of them were there at the moment, but enough that I could make my point. I could see Sonika Mom sitting and gleefully chatting with a couple of the other teachers in the far corner. But I wasn't there for her. The person I was here for was sitting right in front of me. "Hello, Naina," Sister Rose said, stepping in front of me. Her voice had a childlike quality to it that one usually reserves for babies, and not 10-year-old young adults like me. "What do you want, child?" she asked. "I want to speak to Prakash, sir," I replied. She smiled and let me through. I walked over to him, getting his attention by putting my bag on his table. He looked at me questioningly, wondering why I would have the courage to actually approach him after he kidnapped me and fed me the flesh of my best friend last night. "What do you want?" he asked softly. I put my hand up to get him to stay quiet for a second. I then dug around for what I wanted in my bag, pulled out a handful of it, and blew it in his face. Well, it was a gamble. I didn't know if the powder would work or not, but it paid off spectacularly. He pushed his chair back and started howling in pain as his face started crackling and burning like a wooden log that had been set on fire. Holes opened up in his face where the powder had connected, turning orange as tiny flames licked at his skin, which then charred and turned black as he fell and began writhing on the floor in pain. But watching him suffer, as deliciously satisfying as it was, wasn't why I'd done this. I turned around and looked at the other teachers. Some looked horrified at what was happening. Some looked shocked and started coming over to help Prakash, sir. I saw Sonika Mom with her eyes wide open, but there was also a hint of amusement in them. But, most importantly, I could feel waves of malevolence coming at me from some of the other teachers, and at once I understood my situation was far more hopeless than I'd realized. But there was also another fact that was slamming into the walls I'd deliberately put up in my head to protect myself from that devastating truth that was threatening to reveal itself ever since this had started, trying to rip my heart to pieces. But I knew that I absolutely had to face it now. If there were so many teachers and staff who were monsters and actively involved in this, and if they had problems working with each other, then that meant there was someone at the top controlling them, keeping them in line. And deep in my heart, I knew there was only one person capable of doing that I had to face her, sooner rather than later. Part 4. St. Agnes Boarding School was set up almost 100 years ago by a Christian missionary hell-bent on taming the savages who were revolting against the British more and more, under the leadership of a frail, bespectacled old man clad in a white dhoti. After India achieved independence in 1947, most of these missionaries left for their homes back in Britain, and the school passed into the hands of the local Christian community, who helped it become one of the premier educational institutions in Himachal, and dedicated themselves to educating the young generations of the nation. Sister Mercy's eyes would go misty whenever she talked about this, and she talked about this a lot. My bedtime stories would often be about how she joined the school and rose to the rank of principal. With everything that had happened, I wondered if any of that was ever true, or was it all a lie and she had just been using me to practice her cover story? How long had she been killing little kids? In all her time here, how many had she killed? And more importantly, what exactly was she? The thought of the woman who lovingly raised me turning out to be a monster like this was too terrible to contemplate. I looked at the teachers staring at me with unbridled rage and wondered what they would do now. It was Sister Rose who made the first move, as she strode purposefully towards me and dragged me out of the classroom. "Where did you get the ash?" she asked, holding my hands and immediately pulling them back as her own got singed. Ash? Well, I didn't know that's what this was. I shook my head. Think, girl. She was breathing heavily now. Clearly this had shaken her. Good. Oh, you people deserve much worse. I don't know, Mom, I lied. What do you mean you don't know? She exclaimed. Why did you attack him? You mean to tell me you don't know that either? I started crying then, despite desperately not wanting to do it. I didn't know what it was about adults screaming at me, but it always brought this reaction. It wasn't a weakness I appreciated. Sister Rose took a moment to calm herself down and again started questioning me. Where did you get this ash, Naina? I swear, I don't know, I replied. All right, when did you get it? Did you put it into your bag before coming here? She asked. I shook my head. I had to be careful how I answered these questions. Okay, good, she said, nodding her head gently. That's progress. What did you do today? I told her about my routine, how I came to school, about my classes, how Ragnar Mum had preponed a session. Wait, she cut me off. You met Ragnar today? I nodded. And you didn't have a session scheduled with her today? I nodded again. And you didn't have this in your bag when you walked into her office? I shrugged and hid my smile as I saw the wheels turning in Sister Rose's eyes. She quickly turned then and walked away. Try and hypnotize me now, Ragnar Mum. The other teachers didn't let me go for an hour or so. Well, some kept pestering me with questions, but I stuck with my ignorance, staying wary of the monsters amongst them, getting the same treatment from them in return. I don't know how influential Prakash Sir and Ragnar Mum were in their little band of child-murdering demons, but with any luck, they should be pretty distrustful of each other now. It was surprising that the police weren't called, with Prakash Sir dismissing the concerns of the other teachers and saying he was feeling better after putting a wet cloth on his face. I suspect that he took the cloth to hide the fact that he was already healing. Infernal monster. Sister Mercy never showed up, and it's possible that Sister Rose was with her, helping her resolve the tensions in their group. I breathed a sigh in relief. I wasn't ready for that confrontation yet. I took my bag, washed my ash-covered hands at the staff room sink, and left for the remainder of my classes. It was after school, when I was going back to my room, when I ran into Carol, my roommate. I heard you hit Prakash, sir, she said, almost as a question. I nodded. Nice, she smiled, putting her hand up for a high five. I happily obliged. You want to come play with us after lunch? She asked. Yeah, please, I answered, with a bright smile on my face. In the evening, Sonika Mom found me playing Coco with kids from my class. It was after a long time that they'd accepted me as one of their own, and I was so happy that it temporarily took my mind away from everything else. She waved at me when she caught my eye, and I bounced over to her. Oh, you're having fun, she stated. I grinned in response. Come, sit with me for a minute, she said, and led me to a stone bench. Well, you did something wonderful today, she said when we were sitting comfortably on the bench. They're in complete disarray right now, looking at each other with suspicion. Sister Mercy has her hands full dealing with them. My heart sank a little. Deep in my heart I knew she was involved, but to see it confirmed like this made it so much more real. What are they? I asked. Rakshasa, she replied. Flesh-eating demons. Not all of them, though. Your Sister Mercy is an entirely different kind of monster. What is she? I asked. A witch, a Dayan, a very powerful one at that, she said. Has to be to get such strong monsters to obey her. Her memory alterations gave me a fair bit of trouble. She erased your memory too? Yes, she did, Sonika Mom admitted. I wouldn't even have figured it out if it hadn't been for you. I've been hunting her for 10 years now, but I just didn't know what she looked like. I'd almost given up on her ever finding out when you started screaming about Kaustub and how he'd gone missing. After that I knew that I was right, that Sister Mercy was who I'd been looking for all this time, and that she somehow was manipulating our memories, but not yours. I didn't buy the argument that you were suffering from mental illness for even a second. Well, I beamed at that. I knew I had to beat their memory manipulation somehow, she continued. So I broke into the office at night and took down the number of kids in each class in the school on a tiny piece of paper and kept it well hidden. I checked that paper each time you had an outburst, and every time there'd be one less kid in the official records as compared to my paper. That confirmed my suspicions once and for all. I knew then that I couldn't defeat her without taking the help of the only person her powers didn't work on. You. Well, why don't they work on me? I wondered out loud. You're powerful, and it's that power she craves. But I'm normal, I protested. I haven't ever done anything not ordinary. Oh, don't sell yourself short, Naina, she said kindly. You've survived for so long and have put those monsters on the back foot. You are far more special than you realize. She had an odd look on her face, one I couldn't really recognize. What happens next? I asked. We keep causing chaos, she answered. We can't give Sister Mercy a single opportunity to steady this sinking ship. We're going to keep them destabilized. How? I asked. I'm going to kill Prakash tonight, while their attention is fixed on Rachna. This should spark off even more trouble between the two groups, causing more problems for Mercy. And then I'm going to call in some friends. I think it's beyond time we even the odds, right? She winked at me. I agreed so much with that. And what about me? I asked. I can help too. Right now you can help me by staying safe, she replied. They're going to be keeping a close eye on you from now on, more so than they had earlier. Well, in fact, I'm taking a risk simply by meeting you, but I had to take that risk because we may not get this opportunity again before this is over. When will this be over, Mom? I whined. Christmas break, she replied. Most of the kids will go back to their homes, and that's when we strike. Whether we survive or not, it'll be decided then, and I'll stay with you till the end, okay? I nodded. Do you still have the Basma with you? She questioned. The what? I asked. The ash, Naina. The sacred ash, she said. Yes. So that's what it's called. Yes, I still have most of it. Good. Keep it close to you, and don't hesitate to use it if you have to, she said. Well, they're faster than you, and they won't take you lightly now that you have that. I'll use it. I took a deep breath. Will it really be over soon? Yes, it will, and you can take that in writing, she stated firmly. Now, run along. I'll leave before the teachers get too suspicious. I watched her leave, feeling glad that someone like her was on my side, and then went back to playing cockle with my new friends. Lata, our security guard, was outside my room when I returned after having dinner. She smirked when she saw me and pointed at her eyes and then pointed at me. I responded by showing her my bag of basma. Well, she flinched, and I smiled and walked past her. It's strange how quickly things can change. Only a couple of days ago, I was terrified of coming to this room, thinking the half-baked woman was trying to kill me. Now I knew she was on my side, and my roommates too had become my friends, so staying here had become a source of comfort for me. Before going to bed, I looked out of my window at the school grounds, wondering what was happening in the houses of the teachers. It was all so deceptively quiet, but I knew, just like everyone else who was aware of what was going on knew, that a storm was brewing, one that would shake the very foundations of this school. But that storm wasn't coming that night, so it was better to get some rest. I said goodnight to Carol and Verinda, getting similar wishes back for the first time ever. I smiled and put my head down on the pillow as Carol switched off the lights. I stayed awake for something I knew was coming soon. I felt a weight on the foot of my bed and got up to see the half-faced woman staring at me. I got on my hands and knees and crawled over to her and gave her a hug and a kiss on her messed-up forehead. Well, to my surprise, she was tangible, and my hands didn't just pass through her body like they show in the movies. She was shockingly cold, though. Thank you, I whispered into her ears. A blood-red tear ran down her face as she continued to silently stare at me. I once again wondered who or what she was. Well, I hoped to find out soon. I pulled the blanket back up and fell quickly into a deep slumber. It was a loud ringing sound that woke me. It was so shockingly loud and foreign. I'd never heard it before. What was it? I opened my eyes and blinked as the harsh light from the tube light pierced my eyes. The half-faced woman was nowhere to be seen. Carol and Verinda were up too, looking scared. "What's going on?" I asked. "It's the fire alarm," Carol answered, wide-eyed. So, as you can probably tell, that's not a complete story. I will be returning to it very quickly, however, and you're going to get the concluding part tomorrow night. Can you wait that long? Oh, of course you can. I promise, it's definitely coming out tomorrow evening. Recorded already, didn't have time to edit and mix it together though, so that's where you're getting first parts of the story tonight, and not the whole thing together. So, same time tomorrow night. You're going to join me again, aren't you? Of course you are. Now don't forget to click on the link in the video description and find Bikram Mann's new book, which is available now. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. It really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams, and bye-bye.